story concerns the rising rate of suicide in Gilgit Baltistan. We've seen quite a number of such suicides, especially amongst the youth of Gilgit Baltistan. Why is that happening? What are the pressures, whether it be psychological or environmental or social, that lead to such youngsters committing an extreme act such as suicide, something that is also against the religion? We've been joined by Dr. Bilal Shadani. He's a psychotherapist and clinical hypnotherapist. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, to have joined us. Dr. Saab, suicide, we've seen a lot of that across the world, but in Pakistan we haven't seen much of it since these reports that have come from Gilgit Baltistan as far as the suicide rates that are increasing amongst the youth are concerned. What, in your point of view, Dr. Saab, are the main reasons behind it?
See, the thing is that with suicide, you can never point directly at just one root cause. Because suicide is such a multifarious and such a deeply personal act and thought pattern, it merits more investigation into each case on a unique basis. But considering the spate of suicides that the country has been facing from this region, I think that the most obvious culprit would be your first go-to point. So socioeconomic factors, cultural issues. I would go so far as to say that even something such as religion or similar factors have to be considered, because, as you said, religiosity does factor into a lot of how suicide is dealt with once the act has been attempted, if not successfully attempted. So I would say that it merits much more investigation than just simply saying that, money or culture or whatnot. I think it needs to be treated very seriously with a proper investigation.
When you talk of treatment, a serious treatment with the proper education and hindsight and a deep insight into what the society is doing in regions such as Gilgit Baltistan, where, of course, just last year the number of suicides was 29 amongst the youth, do you feel, generally speaking, that within the youth, suicides are basically because of peer pressure or some kind of a psychosocial pressure that makes them think that the only way out is by ending their life? Is it due to some kind of a cultural phenomena? Is it due to some kind of an education related issue that makes them think that the future is very bleak? What is really going on, in your point of view, generally speaking, in the minds of the youth?
Okay, so something that anyone who does any kind of suicide intervention, one of the first things that we have to ensure is that we have to ensure whether a person's suicidality is actually a threat or if it's just what could be called an intrusive thought. Funnily enough, for many people who go through suicidal thoughts, otherwise called ideation, anyone who goes through ideation normally does it because they feel that they are out of options. And the funny thing is that because for them they feel they're out of options, then therefore death is the only option left. That's not true. The problem, unfortunately, for many people who have ideation is that even mentioning the word suicide automatically elicits a whole barrage of religious, spiritual, cultural, social factors that are supposed to demotivate them. But the simple solution in that situation is not to sort of inundate the person who's expressing suicidality with, you shouldn't do it because of this reason. It's just, okay, so why don't you tell me what you're feeling? Because just because they have these thoughts does not mean they're a risk. Peer pressure, yes, it does factor in. Educational aspirations, of course, social, economic, cultural, all of these factor in, but in isolation, they are not enough. They cannot be enough because thankfully or otherwise, humans are very resilient to trauma, generally speaking. But when the trauma builds up, that is when, depending on your breaking point, that's how it manifests. For some people, it could be self-harm. For some people, it could be overdosing. For some, it could be hanging. So it's very important to actually give the person their due space to express what they feel, because catharsis is one of the best ways to tackle suicidality.
When you talk of catharsis, Dr. Saab, do you feel in a region such as Gilgit Baltistan, where the rate of education, the percentage of children getting education is quite high, that systems need to be introduced in all faculties of education, where maybe the children need to go through certain psychotherapy sessions once a month or regularly, one form or the other, so that the teachers can ascertain whether there's some kind of a suicide tendency in any of the children, so that they can be controlled specifically as per the thoughts that they are confronted with.
Okay, so you say once a month. Once a month is far too little. I would say that at least twice a week. And once a month, even in a group setting, is not enough, because any kind of effective mental health counseling is tailored. Just because we're all in the same age bracket doesn't mean we all face the same problems. There's also the gender issue as well. You know, girls don't face the same issues boys do. So it has to be tailored, one. Two, in terms of education, I think it's more important that the adults are given education before the children, because the children, for better or worse, they're acclimatized to be very sensitive to these kind of topics. But adults bring with them a whole host of biases and prejudices because of their own experiences when they were younger. And as a result, they become they project their own insecurities or biases when something like this comes up, saying that, oh, mental health is important, but I don't think it's real. These are real comments that I have had to struggle with, as a mental health professional, from people who are otherwise very educated, very well-to-do, but this does seep in. This would have to be a whole system education system, a whole educational systemic review. It would have to start from the top going down. The children are not so much at risk once the staff are actually well apprised and educated on how to intervene.
That is so true. When you talk of intervention, Dr. Saab, another thing that I feel is very important is this deep sight as far as the parents are concerned. A lot of parents don't realize what their children are going through. They might scold them, they might beat them for one reason or the other. Maybe they are not doing well in their studies, but they don't know, they don't understand the reason why they are not good at it. Maybe there's some kind of a psychological or peer pressure, there's some kind of an abuse going on, psychological or otherwise, at the educational institution or otherwise with their friends. Do the parents also need to understand? Do the parents also, sorry to use the term, need to grow up?
Well, yes, in some cases, growing up is a very effective way to describe it. I would say it's more to do with the fact that parents find mental health counseling to be very threatening, because that implies that the parent has not done their job correctly, quote unquote. They haven't done their job correctly, because if they had done their job correctly, your child wouldn't have mental health issues. Assuming, of course, there are mental health issues. Sometimes just having stress is not a mental health issue. Just because you consider a counselor does not mean that that you have an illness or a dysfunction. Mental health counseling also covers general aches and pains of the mental variety. So someone who's struggling with the burden of 5 subjects versus, say, 3, in the A levels, for example. Some students take more, some take less. But they struggle with the perception that, what will my parents say, what will my khala say, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very important for the parents to recognize that not only are their own worldview is incompatible with that of their children, because they didn't grow up with the internet, they didn't grow up with cell phones, they didn't grow up with a global pandemic. So it's very important that you allow your children to breathe in the environment that they are living, and instead of projecting the one that you take for granted, having already survived and grown out of. It's very important for parents.
It's a very important point, Dr. Saab, that you pointed out, and that is the new age, the age of social media, of internet. A lot of circulation of events or pictures or deep fakes goes on these social media websites as well. And this leads to a lot of pressure on certain youth. Sometimes somebody can be bullied through certain videos or pictures on the social media that could or could not be true. So should there also need to be some kind of an education as far as how to use social media and how to understand what is right and what is wrong is concerned?
Okay, so you phrased it in a very interesting way. What's right or what's wrong? See, what's right or wrong is a matter of perspective. For a lot of parents, they'll say that, my children are addicted to their phone. What they fail to realize is that their children can't go to school because there's a global pandemic. They have...
Dr. Shadani, we have to end this segment right now. Thank you very much to have joined us and to have talked to us about a very important issue. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new segments and stories that pertain to you, us in Pakistan. Stay safe, follow the SOPs. Allah Hafiz.